Benny is a man, always doing what he can. Growing up tough, he knows how to be rough, but had a brain more kin with numbers.
Hey everybody, how are you? Happy Friday to you all. The Boys of Dungeon Lane. Wow. Paul McCartney's 20-something album. And I have to tell you, after hearing the first two songs that were released, between a month and 6 weeks ago, which was Home to Us, and the first one, The Days We Left Behind, I was mildly interested. Now I'm a big Beatle fan, big Paul McCartney fan, but mildly interested because how much different is it going to sound than any of the last three albums? Because his voice has been tattered for the last 12 years or so. But I'm always someone who gives Paul McCartney a thumbs up, like he would, because he's just part of my fabric, my life. Now, maybe it's one of the best albums that he's done in the 21st century. I don't know. Now, John Lennon, in one of his last interviews, said that Paul McCartney likes to write about imaginary people in his songs. He's like a novelist. A lot of boring people do boring things. Postmen, secretaries, writing home. That was Lennon and his thoughts. But this album, The Boys of Dungeon Lane, he's turned the focus to himself, which is very refreshing. There's no Eleanor Rigby, the fireman in Penny Lane, the fool on the hill. Paul is all of those. Now, the title refers to the road near one of McCartney's childhood homes in Liverpool, Fortland Road. And that was referenced in The Days We Left Behind, the first song that was released off this album, pre-album release. Now, he would hang out with Lennon at the time. They'd dream of their future. They'd write songs. And there's different references scattered throughout the album. I call it an album still. I'm an old guy. So it's an intimate, reflective work. It almost works hand in hand with the vulnerability of his voice now at 83 years of age, where you hear the tired strain of being in the business more than 60 years. So he takes on most of the instrumental duties. Andrew Watt, Justin Bieber's guitarist, contributed guitar, keyboards, and percussion, and co-writer on 5 songs. And there's a few friends and relatives. Home to Us, McCartney trades lines with his fellow Beatle, Ringo, who sounds great, and it's very hard to differentiate the two voices at times. And he has a distinctive drumming cadence, which is really good throughout the song. As You Lie There, the lead-off song, McCartney talks about a silhouette that he saw in a window.
I used to walk past your house.
This woman's now a great-grandmother, probably. But he asks if she still remembers him.
Ever cross your mind?
Do I ever cross your mind?
I like to fantasize.
Now, his voice sounds good there. And he sounds like he's setting you up for an album of nostalgia, which he certainly is. His longtime friend, Chrissie Hynde, who from The Pretenders, who was Linda's, one of her best friends, and Charlene Spiteri, a Scottish singer-songwriter, do backing vocals on that song. And you could see it as a sing-along, kind of like Those Were the Days, but a half a century later. And if you hear it, his wife Nancy doing a bit of the spoken word at the end of Mountaintop, you almost hear them tripping. And it's mentioned in the first verse, Magic Mushrooms. Now, McCartney sings songs that pull at your heartstrings. He always has. Salesman Saint is a portrait of Paul's parents. His father was a salesman.
Carry on.
Talks about his mother being a saint, the father, the salesman, not making a lot of money, but she always, the paycheck, took care of them. He always felt safe with his mom. So it's a portrait of his parents, their struggles to keep home together during the wake of World War II. They couldn't take anymore, but they had to carry on. It's bittersweet. And Giles Martin had been forced to do a big band arrangement. Giles Martin, the son of the great Beatle producer George Martin. It gives you a musical mood of the 40s, which is intended because he's talking about his dad and his mom, and he was born in 42. Down South is a song that is about George Harrison.
When we were traveling on the Chester Road,
And he talks about a school bus where they met, empty seat, hitchhiking. And he's the sole musician on the track, McCartney. He accompanies himself on the acoustic and the electric. And it's reminiscent of his boyhood. He's hitchhiking with George. And rock and roll proved to be their bond. And that would never grow old, their bond of rock and roll. And he sings while his love for his friend comes through the understatement of the line, "It was a good way to get to know you." It certainly was. And that was an everlasting friendship until George passed probably about almost 25 years ago. So Lost Horizon is a song that's, to me, McCartney again is the only instrumentalist, and it's dreamy.
recall on the train whistle cutting through the night. Well, I remember.
Good bass line. And to me, it's dreamy. He's just putting himself back into part Paul McCartney, part Beatle. Now, it's a mid-tempo number, and it's haunting. It sounds like a song from the past. You've got to live for now, make every moment count. That's what he says, and we have to listen to Beatle Paul, right? Now, it has love songs, Ripples on the Pond, which is undoubtedly about his wife. An upbeat song about commitment and finding a lasting relationship.
Sometimes I get the feeling you're so good for me. I must be blessed.
And he is blessed. What a great, great life. Simple joys can bring you great pleasure. And though the title of Life Can Be Hard, which was written during the lockdown, I think is one of the better songs on the album. It's a little pessimistic, but he turns it into beauty. Wonderful acoustic guitar player. And his voice,
Life can be hard, but then that's when we start to put it together again. again.
We get used to his new, old Paul McCartney voice. And singing in an unusual high voice that's nearly his old falsetto works in that song. Now, there's no real rockers on this album. As You Lie There is okay. Come Inside, Home to Us. McCartney acts more restrained, I think, more homespun. It's a cross between the original McCartney album, which was almost 60 years ago, produced a bit like Chaos and Creation in the background, in the backyard. It's very personal. I think it's as good as Chaos and Creation, which was one of his best albums in the last 20 years. Because it's persistently jogging his memory. No one can erase the days we left behind. And those days have left us with many classics by Paul McCartney. Are there any classics on here? Well, if you love Paul McCartney, they're all classics. You're just happy enough to have him at almost 84 being with us still. Now, it's hard to perceive that anything crazy could happen in the Beatle world now, 2026, right? Paul's been part of our lives, most of our lives. You have the first ever duet between surviving members. That's a first. So he managed, after all these years, to give us a first. And they reminisce about childhood in Liverpool. And they never considered it all that rough because it was home to them, home to us. And that's the song that really hits me. It really does. Sounds like the song New from 16 or 17 years ago.
The place we used to live in, you could say it wasn't much, but it was home to.
And if you hear Ringo here, it sounds like Paul.
And you could be forgiven if you thought that it was.
Arguably, Ringo's voice is better than Paul's now, but not really with a wink. It's remarkable, on one hand, how they are now pretty much in the mid-80s and still doing new music. But then again, the producer of this album, who helped Paul out, produced the new Stones, the Hackney Diamond from a couple of years ago, which was really Stones. He makes you sound really like yourself. Now, occasionally, you'll remember heights they once reached. Not often anymore, because when you're older, you don't have the drive that you once had. You think differently. There's not the immediacy of having to write a hit. You're rich. Long Tail-Winted Bird off his album 5 years ago was terrific. Ringo Starr's Working Country with T-Bone Burnett. That's a match made in heaven, because Ringo, ever since the Beatles, Honey Don't, Act Naturally, always loved country. So when you listen to this album, you shouldn't expect anything crazy. McCartney is going to be 84. And that's not his style anyway. It's named for a Liverpool street and memories of his youth. Bus rides with George, looking back at your life with fondness, not regret, days we left behind. Now, the interesting thing is he's working with a guy who's in his 30s, in Andrew Watt. Now, I believe that the Stones needed Watt, and they really came out with something worthwhile with him. Now, Watt's smart enough not to dress McCartney in new clothing, not to reinvent an icon. He plays 90% of the instruments. but it doesn't have the feel of someone new. But it doesn't have the feel of someone unworthy of being mentioned in sentences with newer artists. It's straightforward pop rock. It's a pleasant listen, but the problems with it are obviously the toll on McCartney's voice. As you lie there, he tries to reach a high that quite doesn't get there. Days We Left Behind, he sounds like your grandfather talking to you at the table on a Sunday. But the subject matter is so brilliant that you almost forget about the voice because you're listening to the lyrics. He was a master craftsman at melodies. He doesn't have the melody gift that he once had. That has aged as well. Memorable melodies and hooks, not so much anymore. And it's plotting in certain places. But is it fair to compare him to the youthful McCartney? No, that wouldn't be fair to do to anyone. So when you temper your expectations and listen to a man that has given us so much in a half century, we realize that he's just a guy like you and I who happens to be Paul McCartney. Hey, Daniel. My favorite music from Paul, the funny thing with this album is it sounds a little, there's a song here that sounds like Off the Ground. I'll show it to you. I know I'm going to get copywritten here, but I don't care. Let me find the song. This is the most clever song with music.
1, 2, 3. I want to live for love. So many people do.
Come Inside, a rocker. People forget how good McCartney is musically.
You can be my mind if you want.
Never Know. Plotting. Lost Horizon.
Recall on the train, every memory we share.
So you have a lot of plotting music, but that is McCartney's style now. You wouldn't expect to hear I Am the Walrus, although that was John's song, from an 83-year-old. It just wouldn't go well. It's like a 99-year-old having 2 earrings in his ear, dark sunglasses, driving a Maserati. It's a wonderful sight that the guy can still do it, but there's going to be a part of you that says, oh, a little cringy. Well, it's very hard to write rock songs at 83 years of age. I'm a songwriter. I've written many songs. I listen to my songs from the time I was 20, 21 that I wrote, and I cringe. I cringe because I didn't know anything. It's like a 23-year-old guy writing a blues song. What does a 23-year-old know about the blues? Right? It's 5 years out of high school. Paul McCartney has lived a lot of life. If there's ever such a thing as running out of words because you've spoken too many in your lifetime, it would be McCartney. Yet he still finds the words to make us smile and remember our youth. Remember what it was like to be a Beatle fan and what it still is like to be a Beatle fan. Although most of McCartney's faithful following probably have died off from the 60s. You know, if you were in your 20s in the 60s, you're in your 80s, or you might not be here anymore. So the fandom has really dissipated. But you go to a Paul McCartney concert, you see a lot of teenagers who have probably heard their grandparents play the songs when they were younger. Look, is the album Sergeant Pepper? No. But looking at his past albums, let's go over the last 20 years, okay? I think this album falls somewhere between. I didn't like Egypt Station. This falls somewhere. I don't know if it's quite as good as Chaos and Creation in the Backyard, which was 21 years ago. You had a 62-year-old singing. And if you listen to his voice there, a song like Jenny Wren, which is the answer to Blackbird. And when he goes falsetto here, or almost falsetto. No, I haven't.
Like so many girls, Jenny Wren could sing, but a broken heart.
So he was still singing well in his early 60s. Now you go to Egypt Station. Do I think this album is as good as Chaos and Creation? It's a bit different. I think if you heard this song with a Paul McCartney voice of 20 years ago, or if you heard this album, you'd probably like it a little more. Now, McCartney 3, which came out 6 years ago, the leadoff song, Long-Tailed Winter Bird, is a good song. And the reprise at the end, the funny thing is, many people don't notice, the reprise of this song on the album, you'll hear Paul McCartney's voice.
Fly away and find the sun.
That's Paul McCartney's voice 30 years ago. He was working on that song more than 30 years ago. And that was the vocal track from an outtake. That wasn't him 6 years ago. That was him in the 90s singing. He used that vocal track on there, which was a little sneaky. But some of this album reminds me of New.
Don't look at me, it's way too soon to see what's gonna be. Don't look at me.
For everybody out there. And this is the rocking voice now for Paul.
Hey, everybody out there,
Now,
you know what it's like.
in 2007, Memory Almost Full, which he's talking about his mind, like he's done so much. His voice, 2007, was still okay.
I've got too much on my plate.
And then you go to Only Mama Knows, which is like Eleanor Rigby. It's a story. It's, as John Lennon would say, a novel.
Lay me down.
And he was even reminiscing back then. That was me on Ed Sullivan.
That was me at the scout camp in the school play, spanking bucket by the sea. That was me.
So as far back as 20 years ago, McCartney was starting to look at his past fondly. And he was leading up to this album. And we got it. An 83-year-old Paul McCartney, sounding every bit 83. I don't know if the voice is enhanced. There might be some auto-tune on there. But auto-tune has been used way before AI. So everyone uses auto-tune. So it just brings you back into the range. That's his voice. Yeah, he did Live and Let Die. He did Live and Let Die. And Paul McCartney was also offered originally to do To Live and Die in L.A., which Wang Chung did. But look, I think this is a solid album. I think it plods in certain areas. And I think it's brilliant in certain areas. Conceptually, if you want to sit back and go down memory lane and not use your cane once in a while, ditch the cane off the slow song and maybe jog a bit. You have some songs for that. But mostly, it's a scrapbook of who Paul McCartney was and who Paul McCartney is. And it's interesting. It really is, because, I always thought, yes, Daniel, I thought about this. I thought about the two Paul McCartneys battling here. The old Beatle Paul against the elder statesman. A romanticist, a nostalgist. Paul still gives you some of his sappy stuff. No one has a problem with silly love songs, especially when they're from Paul McCartney. But his rich backstory always grabs you in one of these songs. I think so. He was a wild man in the 60s and lived to tell about it. And he tells us about it, historically. He has two personalities. Paul has the Uncle Albert personality of 55 years ago. And he has the wistful, non-storytelling, just thankful to be alive. And yeah, that was me doing all that stuff. And I look in the mirror, wow, that's Paul McCartney. That's me. And he shares it with you now. And I think that's a wonderful thing. He strips down all the pretense. He strips down all the clever studio tricks. He's smart enough to hire a young producer because Paul still wants to resonate and be relevant. Or he wouldn't hire a young producer. Why would he hire someone in his 30s? Well, he saw the Rolling Stones do it, and the Stones were lauded for their last album. They have a new one coming out in a couple of months, but Hackney Diamonds was the best album they had done in quite a while. They sound more Rolling Stones-ish. What happens is you get away from yourself. To me, it's almost like The Godfather, Godfather Part 2, Godfather Part 3. When you continually try to make it new so people will come, you end up making it totally different than the first movie. Like, most of these sequels have nothing to do with the original because you have to try to attract and be different. And I think Paul did that. I think to a fault, he did it when he first left the Beatles. He didn't want to sound like the Beatles at all. But the problem is, when you're a Beatle, you're going to sound like a Beatle. And no one is going to let you forget you're a Beatle. Finally, when he settled into somewhere being a retired Beatle and now a solo artist, did people accept him and understand, yeah, he's not going to sound like he's with the Beatles. He's not with the Beatles anymore. It's like, looking at Al Pacino and expecting him to act like Don Corleone in another movie. It's the same guy, but it's not the same part. And I think that McCartney is now comfortable being, honestly, an old man who just loves to write and perform. But we never let him live it down that he was a Beatle. That's our problem. He's never going to write another Yesterday. A, it was 60 years ago. B, he was in a different headspace, and so were we. He was a 24-year-old kid. And when you think about a 24-year-old kid writing a song like Yesterday, that is impressive enough. It's like a 22-year-old guy writing a blues song when he hasn't gone any through anything in his life. So that's how talented he is. And 2 or 3 songs an album, he kind of makes you think he's still Beatle Paul. It's just in him. You know why? He was Beatle Paul. That was me. That was him. And he's never going to let that go. That's what put him in front of us today with the Boys of Dungeon Lane. I give it a 4 out of 5 star. Probably the reason I don't give it a 5 star is I don't want to be a homer. And everything Paul McCartney does, I just genuflect over. No. I think there are a couple of weak spots in the album, but for the most part, I think it's relevant. And I think it's something, if you want to know about the Paul McCartney life, you can either take a bunch of hours and read a book about his life, or you can take 40 minutes and listen to this. You'll almost get the same effect. Thank you, everybody, for coming in. Long live the Beatles, long live Paul McCartney. Have a good day.